We should thank AMBS, Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary, for the use of the Zoom room and a lot of other organizational support as well. So I will turn it over to Anneli, who will lead us in a centering time before we get into sort of nitty-gritty of worship planning.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so I'm just going to actually share my screen for this and let the Walking Roots Band do the talking. This is a group on the East Coast of the US. They write songs. They've got quite a few songs and voices together. They're an Anabaptist group. And so they've written a song, a really powerful song of lament, How Long, O Lord, which is in Voices Together. It's number 691. If you want to follow along, and we'll just let them kind of, as we kind of enter into Lent and lament, let them explain their process behind the song, and then we'll let this be kind of a time of centering for us. So I will get this going here.
My name is Seth Chrisman.
And I'm Greg Yoder, and we are two members of the Walking Roots Band.
I remember her telling me one time she prays through the Psalms like twice a year. Like she prays them every day. Mm-hmm. Because she says, like, I need those words in my heart and in my head whenever I need to praise and also whenever I need to cry out. And if I don't pray those words, like, so.
We need to have these kind of songs to sing so that we have that as part of our musical and emotional vocabulary. Whether we need those songs in the moment or we're preparing ourselves for a time to come when we will, because everybody has those times when they need them. And yeah, it's important that the church is singing these songs, because we don't always know when our brothers and sisters are needing these kind of songs. And often when you do need those kind of songs, it's almost impossible to sing them for yourself.
This song, which like was born in like us like walking together and like this other like life, like I hope that it serves as seed for other communities to like also create songs that like talk about their experience as they walk with God and through like the good stuff and through the dark valleys. Yeah.
How long, oh Lord, how long will you forget me? Am I forsaken? How long will you hide your face? Oh Lord, I am shaken. How long, oh Lord, how long will you forget me? Am I forsaken? How long will you hide your face? Oh Lord, I am shaken. See how I pass my weary days in sighs and groans, and when it's night, my bed is watered with my tears, my grief consumes and dims my sight. How long, oh Lord, how long will you forget me? Am I forsaken? How long will you hide your face? Oh Lord, I am shaken. How long, oh Lord, how long will you forget me? Am I forsaken? How long will you hide your face? Oh Lord, I am shaken.
So one of the themes that we're going to be kind of talking about tonight, that those of us who've been planning it have kind of been thinking about as we prepare for Lent, is this idea of trusted structures and creative change, and how we hold these two things in tension as we always plan worship, and especially for a season like Lent, or the same thing could apply for Advent, that you don't do all the time. We do this once a year. And so how do we balance having some continuity from year to year And how do we balance bringing in things that are new and different and help us kind of reimagine what the season can be? And so I think for every community, that balance will be different. But I'm curious to know from you, if any of you were able to put in the chat, what are some trusted structures that your community relies on during Lent? So this could be a certain service that you always do. We always do a Monday, Thursday service. Maybe this is the one time a year that you do foot washing. That's a trusted structure. Maybe you have a song that someone in the community wrote that has become kind of a theme song that people sing during Lent. I'm trying to think of other trusted structures. Communion on Good Friday, that's an excellent example. If you want to go into Easter weekend, I think you can do that too. It's sometimes helpful to hear about plans for those as well. For my church, it's singing the Hallelujah chorus on Easter Sunday. Ash Wednesday and Maundy Thursday services. Cross set up in the sanctuary. Circulates a daily devotional written by members. That's really cool. That's awesome. Any other trusted structures? Joint worship service, beautiful. As I'm looking at the chat here with Ash Wednesday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, there's so many services. I was somehow managed to blissfully forget that. So it's always nice to have a joint option for one of them. That's lovely. We always get a trumpet player or a few.
We do a Palm Sunday processional with kids waving the palms.
Beautiful. Nice. So we'll keep talking about this. Creative change we'll kind of get to in a few different sections here. So you can keep thinking about what are the trusted structures that your community kind of leans into, and what are the ways of, what are the things that you might be bringing in this year that might be creative change that will supplement your trusted structures. And so some of the ideas in Leader Magazine might be some of those. So I will turn that over to Katie and Alissa to talk about the Leader Magazine materials.
Yeah, and Alissa volunteered. She'll go first talking through the later materials. Hopefully you have this that you can be looking at, or you can just listen to Alissa talk about it. But Alissa, do I understand correctly that you generally do use the later materials for Lent every year?
We usually do. I was looking back, and some Advent seasons we have ended up changing things more or doing something quite different, but usually Lent we lean pretty heavily on what's in Leader.
All right, yeah, go ahead and tell us about what you're planning to use this time, and how you make decisions about what to use and what not to use, and how to shift things around. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm at Hamilton Mennonite Church in Ontario, by the way, for those who don't know me. So what I was thinking, when I sit down with my worship committee and we are deciding whether or how to use certain worship materials, I think we're often looking for something kind of tangible to hang on to while we're being moved from one place to another. So often we think first about how we respond to whatever overarching theme is given. This year in Leader, we have created in the image of God, shaped by Jesus. And I have found that we appreciate themes that are, somehow tangible or memorable, maybe has a clear visual element, something that might transform into either visual elements or something that we can then kind of bring back in different ways so people think about it through the week, because there's something that touches on something they'll see elsewhere. And also the weekly themes give us different angles of reflection on whatever the overarching theme is. So that's, often the first piece we kind of just have that response to. So yeah, we like what we have in front of us this year. The created and shaped, what feels sort of tangible and visual about that is thinking about for example, what's suggested in some of the visual things around using pottery as visual elements, or I was thinking about Play-Doh also, either with adults or kids. We have tables in our sanctuary set up that are usually coloring tables for the kids to stay in the service throughout the service. And I'm always trying to think of what other things we can have for kids there. So I was wondering about maybe having Play-Doh there, and I don't know whether we could connect it in with the children's time as well, but to have some pieces that just thinking about being created and shaped and what that means, and different ways to reflect on that. And really it could come from any art form that is represented in your congregation. So if you have other artists in your congregation that create and shape things, even if it's shaping a painting or that kind of thing, there could be a way to think about leaning into that theme, whether that's in thinking about rituals you create or responses you invite. So, and just I'll talk about some of the pieces of the resources. So again, thinking about the children and the children's time, this may be something that your churches do, because the church I grew up in actually did this often, but for the first time this past Advent, we experimented with having just one children's time leader for the whole season, and kind of had some consistency for connecting the themes. And we actually used a worship resource, which was not leader, that had kind of an art curriculum. So we had a different art project each week. So when I'm thinking about the Play-Doh for created and shaped, I'm thinking, you could have that connect in each week if you have the same leader thinking through the themes and then suggesting to the kids to take something back to their tables. And if we, we'll often change the children's time materials, because that really comes out of what age you're used to having in your churches, and we usually have to adjust things to a pretty small age for the kids who are most active in our children's time. So those are definitely some adjustments that we make on our end. One of the other pieces that's in the materials here are the suggestion of testimonies, people sharing some kind of response to the theme each week. And we often like to do that in Lent, have some other voices come in. I preach most of the time, so we always like finding other ways to bring other voices in, and people appreciate hearing each other's stories. So often that's like sort of as the end of the sermon, as kind of maybe an illustration of the theme. So tied in that way. I think we will do that again this year. I was thinking of suggesting to people that they could tell a story to respond to the guiding questions that are given, or some people might be more comfortable saying, I found this poem and it kind of says what I want to say, or I found this piece of art, or I did this piece of art, and that maybe that could be a way of getting some different people to respond that usually think they can't speak in front of church. So I was thinking about that as a different option for the testimonies. And this will come back later when I talk a bit about spiritual practices outside of worship, but I was thinking that instead of the guiding questions, you could also ask people, if people are used to maybe giving something up for Lent or taking on a spiritual practice for Lent, you could simply ask them, like, talk for 2 minutes about your experience with your spiritual practice for Lent, in the service. It doesn't even have to connect to the theme of the day. Just say, talk to us about your Lent practice for 2 minutes. So that would be another testimony opportunity. On the connection of testimonies, like Lent is just thinking about other responses that other people can give in worship. Lent tends to be a time when we feel like we can invite a little bit more out of people, like, a time to, like confession is a something that we emphasize in Lent, and really thinking about reflection. Sometimes during Lent, I've made sure to have like a time of silent reflection at the end of a sermon, with a reflective question, or might be a time when you introduce different rituals, depending on what your congregation is used to, ways that it can reflect and respond. I was looking back to one year when the theme was about Ashamed No More was the name of the theme, and we moved instead of having confession at the top of the service, we actually followed the sermon with it, kind of as a way of like reflecting first on kind of what we were doing, like about this confession, and not having it sort of top heavy, but like just really thinking about that first, and then offering confessions. So that was just a way that we kind of played with our usual structure. I'll say a word about music. I know Benjamin's going to talk about music some more. Sometimes we have a repeated theme song in a theme. Lent can feel long for a theme song. I don't know about you, it depends how many verses your theme song has. But we have thought about the idea of using like a short refrain that we would use not necessarily as a standalone hymn, but within another act of worship, maybe connected to confession, or as a response to the sermon or the testimony, or connecting the two of those somehow, or even at the end of children's time to invite the kids into that theme repetition more intentionally. So we haven't settled on our potential theme song yet, but I thought I could name the ideas I had in case any of them grab any of you. I'll list them quickly so you can jot down the numbers or the titles if it's helpful to you. So ideas that I had, so these are short songs that I thought could potentially connect to either the theme specifically or Lent more generally. So 748, Take Me As I Am. 701, You Are All We Have. 736, Hold Us in Your Mercy. And 559, O Lamb of God. And that one, I actually thought that you could create other verses to fit the weeks. So it has a few verses in the hymnal, but each verse is just a few words. It's O Lamb of God, I come. And so I thought, looking at the stories of Jesus throughout Lent, you could look at the stories and say, oh, bread of life, I come. Oh, water of life, I come. Light of the world, I come. And so you could, create some other verses that connect to the stories. So that was one idea I was thinking about a little bit more today. So maybe we'll settle on that one. We'll see. Scripture, just a note that in sermons, we're used to putting scriptures in conversation with each other. I also often like that if we can do that in readings, like if there's a way to put scriptures in conversation with each other. And I don't know if that's something you haven't done before, that might not feel natural. I did find some readers' theaters from 2008 Lent. This is what happens when you're a worship resource pack rat. But so this year's texts from many Lents ago, where they're kind of back and forth with each other, like putting the Old and New Testament in conversation. But you can play with that in other ways. You might find a refrain from the day's psalm that somehow fits into one of the other readings, or play with that. So just, think about other ways to have the scriptures in conversation with each other beyond just the sermon. And then just a couple things that we might do for kind of the special services. Palm Sunday, for example, instead of a sermon, one year we just told or read some of the stories that come after Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, some of the stories that your congregation might miss out on if you don't do other Holy Week services, or if not everyone attends other Holy Week services. So that's just an option if you want a non-sermon option. Back to the beginning of Lent for Ash Wednesday, we haven't had a tradition of an Ash Wednesday service at our church. But last year, for the first time, we did a drop-in prayer station thing, which worked well when not many people were allowed in the building at the same time. So we're going to do that again. People enjoyed it. So people could just come and receive ashes and leave, or there were different prayer station options. So that was fun. And then we usually have a Good Friday service. And hot tip if you're interested. So I just realized this morning as I was looking at these materials, that these materials were in Leader 12 years ago, and we used them in 2011. So my first Lent with my congregation was these materials, and this is actually going to be my last Lent with my congregation, as it turns out. We're using them again. And so in Lent 2011, I wrote a Good Friday service going with these texts, and the theme was just slightly different, so you might have to adjust it. But if you look at commonword.ca and search the title Into Human Hands, there's a Good Friday service, and there's lots of other Good Friday services. That's where we often find materials for our Good Friday services from people mostly across Mennonite Church Canada who write things. So anyway, there's one service you might look at that goes in some of these themes. So I think that's kind of what I had in mind to share about this year's Lent stuff.
Yeah, great, thanks. If anyone has questions along the way, please feel free to throw them in the chat. And we will come back to Lent materials on Together in Worship as well later. But so thanks for that overview of the leader materials. And if you look at the leader pages, you'll see that it really leans heavily into the trusted structures. For each day, it suggests a gathering and confession, hymn of praise, sermon, response. And so maybe your congregation has that kind of similar order of worship. And as Alissa said, like one of the things that she mentioned was changing the placement of the confession from the beginning of the service to after his sermon. And that's an example of creative change within a trusted structure, that it's a small change, but it can change the whole feel of the service. So you don't have to bring in a circus to make it interesting. You can make small, meaningful changes that kind of reinvigorate the trusted structures. There are also a lot of essays in the Worship Leader Edition. Again, that is this book, the Voices Together Worship Leader Edition. And I'm going to throw these in the chat, and then I'll read them out loud as well, in case anyone doesn't have the chat up here. But so there are essays in here about using the Voices Together visual art in worship, about dance, candles, drama, biblical storytelling, Visio Divina, which is a way to contemplatively, is that a word? Contemplatively engage in visual art, and many more. So if you just look through the table of contents of the Worship Leader Edition, you might get a lot of ideas. And so the point is not that you need to do all of these things, but that Lent or any kind of longer worship theme or series is a time that you might have people in place to do several weeks in a row, and so they can put some time into developing dramas for several weeks in a row, or maybe even commit to the whole series, so that you can choose one of these and extend it throughout the series, or a couple small changes. So that's just a few ideas to think about how to stretch a little bit, but just always be thinking about not to make things too unpredictable. You still want people to feel at home and to be able to latch on and feel like they know what's coming. So I'll pass it over to Benjamin then to talk a little bit more about songs in Voices Together and use in Lent.
Thank you. And thanks for those great ideas as well, Alissa, with things that you have done help to prime the pump. But just to start sort of in square one, to as you're thinking about choosing songs, you probably led to the part of the table of contents that deals with this. So that would be Journey to the Cross, which is 304 to 319. So that's a good starting place, right? You know, as you, in the same way you think about Advent and that kind of thing. But to remember that is not the only place that you would find songs appropriate for Lent. So perhaps using scripture passages for that Sunday, using the scripture reference in the back of the hymnal would be one place you could start as well, if there's a theme you're using throughout. And then, of course, in the topics and uses in worship index in the back, there is also on page 1116 a section just for Lent that has songs that still relate in various ways with various themes or topics that could be used depending on the focus of that Sunday. And there's a few dozen more options in that section that are outside of the Journey to the Cross section, as well as worship resources. So, and you can, I think there are also then a number of other references in the Worship Leader Edition under the back, similar topics and uses in worship index. So those would be some good sort of big chunk places that you can look. But then similarly, as Alissa mentioned, short songs. So one thing we wanted to do tonight was to just sort of lift out the helpfulness and strategies of short songs and how they can be used. And so we use the term short song. Well, what qualifies as a short song? Because some strophic hymns are pretty short. But what we sort of mean is just often some element of repetition within it. So Taizé, of course, comes to mind. There are, a couple dozen Taizé songs in Voices Together, something that has this repetition that you can use. But there are also a number of songs that were specifically designed as sort of a short song. And so they shouldn't be seen as a once and done, you can just quick do it and then you move on to the next thing in worship, but that it is something that can be internalized almost as a mantra, but in sung form. One option that I'll throw out that maybe wouldn't have come to mind initially, but that could be used is 572, Let This Mind Be in You. It's only 2 lines long. It's too blurry, of course. So how can short songs be used? I'm sure many of you have used short songs in lots of ways, but I'll just name at least some that come to mind in hopes that they jog some ideas for different people in different ways. But one way, as has been mentioned, is just to bring back each Sunday as sort of this, as a ritual, as something to latch on to. Another way is just interspersed with prayer, and that is sometimes a common way of a Lord, hear my prayer kind of a thing. So if there's some sort of repeated prayer that's being used, or even a prayer that is changed each Sunday in small ways, that can be sort of an anchor point. They can also be integrated with worship resources. So sometimes the worship resources have natural points to take a break and include that. And so can be sort of the congregational response to the leader part or that kind of thing. And then a number of other ways. So using it during the same one during offertory, or as a gathering or sending type of a marker. So a number of different ways, and the sky's the limit. You can be as creative as you want to. The idea with those being that is the element that is easy to be repeated. So they're also in the accompaniment edition and the worship leader edition. There's also some essays on incorporating and using short songs in worship, and some ideas around how that can be done if you so desire. The other thing I would just mention on is special music. So, anytime we get into these seasons, it's nice to think about some things that are maybe outside the box, or take a little extra planning. So as has been mentioned, that could be in the form of bringing in brass players for Easter, or a processional for Palm Sunday. Maybe you get a couple choirs, the children's choir and some adult, something like that. Those are really nice ways, of course, to do special music, but it doesn't necessarily have to be those bigger things. So some ideas that I have worked with over the years. One is just even when I'm thinking about if I'm playing prelude. So thinking about what is the tone of the service and how am I sort of preparing that tone. So if it's going to be a more contemplative service, thinking about setting that tone in the prelude music. And so it could just be as simple as communicating with each person who's doing prelude each Sunday, and giving us, sometimes we don't bring them into the conversations, and it can be really helpful to get that point across and what we're hoping for, or something like that in the tone. In terms of also, while talking about prelude, that can actually be a handy way to teach new songs. So maybe you're going to use a new song in worship some Sunday, or even for a service outside of Sunday morning, Ash Wednesday, Good Friday, those kinds of things. And you don't get to use these songs very much, but you're trying to teach something new. That's a good way to get it in their ear, by just maybe having someone who's playing piano play that, and then it comes up in the service, and all of a sudden people have it magically in their ears. So that can be a way to use special music as in a helpful way. And then other ways, just another thought is just to involve instrumentalists or even a pianist as a meditative reflection within the service. And this can be in lieu of singing, even like maybe you're doing a theme song and you're on week 5 and you're just sort of like, okay, let's take a break. And so you have an instrumentalist play it instead. And so it sort of gives a new side, a new or a different way to approach that. So it also can give time for reflection or contemplation, that kind of thing. So, and I'm sure many of you have other ideas of special music or ways to incorporate it into the season. So feel free to throw those into the chat as you think about them as well, so we can crowdsource ideas. But those were some thoughts I had.
Thanks, Ben. That's great. Let's go to Alissa talking about nurturing spirituality through Lent. And then, yes, we've got Alyssa's list also of possible theme songs, I think, is being requested in the chat. So maybe you can put that in after you talk about nurturing spirituality, Alissa.
That sounds like a good order of things. Yeah, so I just thought or offered to share sort of under the category of some pastors are eternal optimists. Every year I create, actually Advent and Lent, I create a post on our website suggesting different possible spiritual practices for people to kind of pick up on their own for those seasons. Yeah, and for Lent, especially knowing that, you know, some people are used to giving something up, but trying to introduce the idea of what practice might you take on, what are you making space for as you maybe think about fasting during Lent, or what is it, what is the way that God needs to speak to you. So I will share our list from last year, and I think I usually err on the side of giving way too many possibilities. So don't, you know, make my mistake. But I think last year I at least managed to organize them in a less overwhelming way. So, you know, I'm learning. All right, so I will share this with you. So this is just on our website. So yeah, just a bit of a description of the theme. And so last year was seeking God's ways. And so then I kind of organized them around in different ways. So a way of song. So a YouTube music playlist of songs that somehow connect to the theme, which could also be a way to help people get to know more voices together songs, especially ones that might not come naturally to them. Way of reflection. There's lots of different places that create different resources. So we have, you know, downloaded or bought 1 or 2 over the years. So they're available to people in our congregation. A way of prayer, whether joining, you know, maybe your congregation has a prayer group that meets regularly, or there's different prayer apps, that kind of thing. Again, Common Word, you can borrow books and reflections and things from Common Word. A way of creativity. Lent, this is, oh no, I forget her name. Praying in Color is her book and her website, and she creates calendars for both Lent and Advent and suggests different ways that you might color in, like an Advent calendar, but color in a Lent calendar with your praying. Or Mennonite Pastor Joanna Heriter has these colored pencil prayers, so different ideas there. A way of justice. Last year we had a focus on the climate emergency, so just some suggestions around either reading or taking action in that area. Mennonite Church USA, I think primarily, I don't think it's binational anymore. Anyway, there's still an at-home Lent resource that's created and available on Common Word or Together in Worship. So that's an all ages, family friendly kind of Lent resource. It's designed to use at home. So that's another thing to invite people into. And it's also tradition, like almsgiving. This is like a traditional action of Lent. And so a way of, I combine gratitude and generosity. And I think some of these I mean, some of these ideas have been inspired by other pastors. They're not all my ideas, but anyway, so ways to suggest for forgiving or for giving thanks, and then just listing all of the scriptures for those people who like to read the scriptures ahead of time each Sunday and do their own reflections. Yeah, for the services. So that's just another sort of piece that might be easy to forget about if you're just planning worship, but as I said before, with the testimony piece, you could find a way to kind of invite that into worship as well. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. That's excellent. We've talked a few times, just briefly, it's come up about communion. And so I just want to take this opportunity to highlight the communion orders in the Worship Leader Edition. I find planning communion somewhat overwhelming always, because there's such a order. There's so many ways to do things. And I find having clear kind of guides or inspiration quite helpful. And so the worship leader, of course, is so helpful for that and a million other things. So starting at number 222 in the worship leader edition, we have the introduction to communion and some practical guidance. Again, kind of talked about this with our trusted structures. Most communities kind of have a way that they, people file in or for communion, or they pass things around, or they greet their neighbors, or however you kind of do it. But then at the bottom of the next page, well, first we can see the art that is related to communion, which is so beautiful, by Donna Park. And so that's really lovely. And there's her artist statement as well. But there are 6 expressions of communion and voices together. And they are not all perfectly suitable for every week. Like if your community does communion on Maundy, Thursday, or Good Friday, the global celebration, for example, I find really celebrative. And so it probably would not fit super well with your Maundy, Thursday, or Good Friday service. But the common practice, the communion resources from the Iona community is really beautiful. The Solemn Memorial is the one that's kind of recommended for Holy Week, and it draws on Anabaptist, kind of historical Anabaptist sources. And you could supplement that with your own historical Anabaptist sources if you wanted to try to elevate those voices as part of the Holy Week communion. You could do that. The community sharing is my personal favorite expression of communion in the Worship Leader Edition. It's just a way of, we just did it actually the other week at the Laurelville Music and Worship Leaders Retreat with a group of about 70 of us, and that worked quite well actually with that size of group to have people calling out in sharing. And so if you have a more intimate service, that might be an option. And then the one inspired by early Christian practice would more closely resemble what you'd see in a more liturgical or traditional liturgical, what we associate with liturgical service. And so if that form is appealing to you, that is also there as the 6th expression. And so just to highlight that as you're planning communion, if you need a breath of fresh air or a different way of doing things, different words, these I cannot recommend enough, are just really, really helpful for thinking about what you might want to do. And it also just has an order of worship for communion on that page, which I think I mentioned, but it's really helpful to think about what you might supplement from the leader materials as part of that, or the themes from the leader materials when you look at that order of worship for communion. So that's just a little brief overview of some options you have for communion from Worship Leader Edition, along with, of course, the freedom to do whatever makes the most sense for your community.
As promised, let me share my, wait, can I share my screen? Or do you want to share your screen, Anneli, with Together in Worship up?
Sure.
So anything that's on this website that Anneli is about to share is has been shared through Creative Commons, which means it's free to use in worship. And so this is the homepage, togetherinworship.net. And if you scroll down a bit, there is Lent resources, and we try to change these banners to follow the or even anticipate the liturgical year, so that worship planners can be using that. So if you click on that, or in the search bar if you would put Lent, or on the left side there's the filters, can you scroll down? You can filter by genre. So if you're looking for a certain element, then there are topics, and at some point down there, there's season, or I forget if it's season or church year. Can you keep, yeah, season. So then there's Lent season there as well. So lots of different ways to get to Lent, or in the future in another part of the year, to get to these different topics. And you can just see there are visual art and prayers by Alissa Bender, who's with us today, Joanna Hereder. I'm not sure if the Joanna here is Joanna Hereder or a different Joanna.
It's my sister, so I'm not sure which is better. I think
Oh, okay. I'm sure she's written some lovely prayers as well, but maybe not on Together in Worship. Yeah, so lots of wonderful options here to supplement what's in Voices Together, to supplement what's in Leader.
Awesome. So those are available always too. I'll put that link in the chat. And that's, I think, the end of our kind of like whirlwind overview of things related to Voices Together, Worship Leader Edition, Together in Worship, kind of independent practices that you can foster, and then Leader Magazine as well. So there's certainly no shortage of options. I know folks, Joanna has a new name. Wish I was a hereder. I feel like it is. So we have a moment for questions if anyone has any questions. But what I think we might do is do our sending, and then folks can stick around for more kind of casual conversation, brainstorming, sharing of ideas. And so we'll do kind of a Q&A time after we do our sending, in case people are needing to hop off. So why don't we do that, Katie, next?
Whoops. Let me put. I'm going to read a benediction from Together in Worship. So I'll put the link in the chat. If you do want to open it up and speak along with me on mute, you are welcome to do that. A benediction: live in hope and love. Live in hopeful attention to the one who comes to deliver us. Live in hope, live in love. Amen.
Amen. Thanks everyone for joining us. Feel free to hop off now if you need to, but if you're wanting to stick around, wish I was a poet. Yes. I'm just seeing that full name now. If you're wanting to stick around now, you can tell us about your poetry or anything else that you've got prepped and coming for Lent, or just brainstorms if you're wondering, want to talk more about theme songs or creative changes or any of those kinds of things. So we'll just kind of open it up now.
Just going to say, Let This Mind Be in You is a great one too. I've taught that just a cappella, like sort of mid-sermon a few times, like as a response in the middle of my sermon, and people just caught on super quick. Yeah, that's another great one.
That's awesome. I was remembering in 2021 when we did this, we had a video of I Want Jesus to Walk With Me with movement, because it was all about like, how can we get people to experience collective action when we're not all singing together, when people were virtual. So that's another good, short one that works well with adding some body percussion or whatever it is.
And still a good idea to do that even when we all are in the same room.
Yes.
Let people move.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is our first like familiar Lent since 2019, right? I mean, like last year we didn't have a full sanctuary. Or that we were online. Before that we got cut off halfway. So it's an interesting to reflect on too.
Yeah, crazy. It is cool. It'll be interesting to hear your reflections, Alissa, maybe about what's, if you notice different things with these materials, doing them 12 years later, like how they kind of, live and grow and change, and what kind of stands out differently different times. And
You're asking me to remember 12 years ago?
Yes, I am. I would not remember Lent 12 years ago, so you don't have to either.
I was thinking it would work well for reflecting on like how our congregation has been shaped in 12 years together, since I'll be leaving at the end of Lent. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
Anyone, any of the participants want to talk about whether you're using the leader Lent materials, or if you have another theme that your congregation has come up with?
Later materials.
Down on Steinman to use the leader materials, Janessa.
That's awesome.
My congregation is doing pilgrimage as a theme. I wasn't part of the discussion, so I'm not sure how they came to that, or decided why they decided not to use the leader materials, but pilgrimage.
Huh.
Will that be
Someone-
with the lectionary texts, or a totally different sort of series of stories?
Probably lectionary. I don't know. I'm just going to be the song leader 1 week, so I've only been to one meeting. I haven't heard all the details yet.
So you go to a meeting when you're a song leader?
Yeah, they try to have for larger series, especially Lent and Advent, we try to have a team
That's awesome.
that commits to the whole time and that gets together early on to talk about ideas.
Wow, great. Very
And
cool.
so the song leader can't be there every week, and so I got called in.
Nice. Cool. Well, this has been great. Thank you all for being here and chatting, and feel free to reach out through AWN if there's ever questions that come up. You've got the website and the Facebook group, so we're happy to chat if things emerge. And otherwise, we hope you have a really lovely Lent, and we'll see you in a few months, hopefully for something else. So thank you all and have a good evening.